The bell above Sarah Miller's barbershop door jingled softly as she looked up from wiping her scissors, momentarily blinded by the harsh winter light. A tall, gaunt man stood there, hand resting firmly on a small boy's shoulder, his eyes darting nervously around the shop. "Just a trim," he muttered, gently nudging the child forward. Nothing about this haircut should have been memorable. As Sarah draped the cape around the boy's thin shoulders, she felt him flinch beneath her touch. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Kevin," he whispered so soft she barely caught it. When Sarah lifted the hair at his nape, her comb caught on something. She parted the matted strands and froze, her stomach dropping like an elevator cut loose. Dorothy Wilson, her elderly customer waiting her turn, gasped audibly, her knitting needles clattering to the floor. The child's scalp was a battlefield of angry red lesions, crusted yellow discharge seeping from wounds that had clearly festered for weeks. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, unable to mask her horror. The father's head snapped up. "Problem?" But Sarah wasn't listening. She was already reaching for the phone. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Lakefield, Maine, sat nestled between rolling hills and dense pine forests, the kind of small town where folks still left doors unlocked and brought casseroles when someone got sick. Main Street consisted of a post office, diner, hardware store, and Sarah Miller's barbershop, a narrow brick building wedged between the pharmacy and the Lakefield Gazette office. The barbershop's large front window displayed a weathered barber pole that had been spinning since Sarah's grandfather opened the place in 1952. Sarah Miller hadn't planned on becoming a barber. At 50, with streaks of premature silver in her chestnut hair, she'd spent 18 years as an ER nurse until her husband's death 3 years ago. The grief had been too much, the hospital too full of memories, so she'd traded syringes for scissors, reviving her grandfather's shop and finding unexpected solace in the rhythm of cut, comb, and conversation. Folks said she had a gift for listening, and in a town Lakefield size, a barber heard everything. Richard Peterson was different. He'd arrived in Lakefield 9 months ago with his nephew Kevin, renting Old Man Clancy's hunting cabin outside town. A veteran, Afghanistan, people whispered, with hollow eyes and a permanent furrow between his brows. He worked odd jobs, paid in cash, kept to himself. Sometimes at the general store, his hands would shake for no reason, and he'd stare at nothing, like he was seeing something the rest of them couldn't. Little Kevin Peterson was a ghost of a child. Thin wrists, oversized clothes, eyes too old for his 8 years. He'd been enrolled briefly at Lakefield Elementary until Richard pulled him out for homeschooling. The boy rarely spoke above a whisper, if at all, but Dorothy Wilson, who lived nearby, swore she'd seen him drawing in the dirt outside their cabin, pictures so detailed and beautiful they'd break your heart. William Bradford had been Lakefield's police chief for 25 years, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and lines etched deep around his eyes. He coached Little League and had a teenage son with autism. Chief Bradford understood struggling parents. He also understood the line between struggle and neglect. He'd kept an eye on the Petersons from a distance, sensing something wasn't right but never having cause to intervene. Until today. Richard Peterson's fingers drummed against his thigh as he watched Sarah's face change. The morning had started like any other. Kevin quiet at breakfast, picking at the cold beans Richard had heated on their hot plate. The boy's constant scratching had worsened over the past 2 weeks, leaving bloody spots on his pillow. Richard had tried everything. The herbal salve his grandmother swore by, washing Kevin's hair with diluted vinegar, even the expensive medicated shampoo that had cost him a day's wages at the lumber yard. "It's just a rash," Richard said, his voice harder than intended. "Kids get them all the time." Sarah's trained nurse's eye knew better. Sarah gently tilted Kevin's head forward, parting the matted hair to reveal what had horrified her. The boy's scalp was a battlefield of red, inflamed skin with crusted lesions. In several places the skin had broken open, oozing a yellowish discharge. The unmistakable odor of infection rose from the wounds. This wasn't just a rash. This was severe neglect. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady for Kevin's sake, "your nephew has a serious infection. He needs medical attention immediately." Richard's posture stiffened. "I've been treating it at home. Natural remedies, my grandmother." "This isn't something home remedies can fix," Sarah interrupted, her fingers still gently probing Kevin's scalp. The boy sat motionless, his only reaction an occasional blink when she touched a particularly tender spot. "He needs antibiotics, proper cleaning. How long has it been like this?" "Few days," Richard muttered, though the extensive inflammation told a different story. The shop door jingled, and Dorothy Wilson stepped in, her gray hair tucked neatly beneath a knitted hat. At 75, Dorothy was Lakefield's unofficial historian and self-appointed guardian of local children. Her shrewd eyes immediately assessed the tension in the room. "Morning, Sarah," she called cheerfully, then paused at the sight of Kevin's reflection in the mirror. "Lord have mercy, what's happened to that child?" Richard's face darkened. "Mind your business, ma'am." Dorothy drew herself up to her full 5'2". "When it comes to children suffering, everyone with eyes to see has business being concerned." Kevin's small frame suddenly shuddered, a violent tremor running through him. Sarah placed her hand on his forehead and felt the telltale heat of fever. "He's burning up," she said, alarm rising in her voice. "Mr. Peterson, I'm calling Dr. Thompson." Richard stepped forward, his movements jerky. "No doctors. We're leaving." He reached for Kevin, but Sarah stepped between them. "This child needs medical help," she insisted, meeting Richard's eyes directly. "If you won't take him to the hospital, I will." Something dangerous flickered across Richard's face. "You have no right." "I have every right," Sarah cut in, her voice steady but firm. "As a medical professional and a human being." Dorothy moved closer to Kevin, her weathered hand resting protectively on his shoulder. "Richard Peterson, I've known you since you came to town, and I know you love this boy. But sometimes loving means admitting when you're in over your head." Sarah slipped her cell phone from her pocket and stepped toward the back room. "I'm calling Chief Bradford." Richard lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. "Don't you dare bring police into this." The sudden movement startled Kevin, who let out a small whimper, the first sound he'd made since arriving. The noise seemed to cut through Richard's anger, and he released Sarah's arm as if burned. "Uncle Rick," Kevin's voice was paper-thin. "My head really hurts." Richard's face crumpled momentarily before hardening again. "It's okay, buddy. We'll fix it at home." Sarah met Dorothy's eyes over Kevin's head, a silent communication passing between them. Dorothy nodded almost imperceptibly and edged toward the phone on the counter. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah tried again, gentler now. "I was an ER nurse for 18 years before I took over this shop. What Kevin has isn't just going to go away. It's infected, and infections can spread to the bloodstream. That's dangerous. Life-threatening dangerous." Something vulnerable flashed across Richard's face. "I've been doing everything I can." "I believe you," Sarah said softly. "But sometimes our best isn't enough. Sometimes we need help." The shop fell silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall and Kevin's increasingly labored breathing. Outside, snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes dancing past the large front window. The stillness shattered as Kevin suddenly slumped forward in the chair, his small body convulsing. Sarah caught him before he could hit the floor. "He's seizing!" she shouted, lowering him to the ground and turning him onto his side. "Dorothy, call 911 now!" Richard stood frozen, his face a mask of terror as his nephew trembled on the barber shop floor. Dorothy was already at the phone, her voice clear and precise as she gave the dispatcher their location. Sarah kept her fingers on Kevin's pulse, counting the rapid beats while murmuring reassurances to the unconscious child. "Temperature's too high," she explained to Richard, who had finally snapped out of his paralysis and dropped to his knees beside them. "The infection's gone systemic. He needs emergency care." The fight seemed to drain from Richard all at once. "Save him," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the ambulance approached. Sarah kept one hand on Kevin's forehead, the other gripping Richard's arm. "They're coming," she assured him. "We caught it in time." But as Kevin's breathing grew more labored, his skin burning beneath her palm, Sarah wasn't sure that was true. What she'd seen beneath his hair spoke of weeks of neglect, not days. By the time the paramedics burst through the door, Kevin's lips had taken on a bluish tinge. Chief Bradford arrived seconds behind the ambulance, his cruiser skidding slightly on the freshly fallen snow. He took in the scene, paramedics working over the small boy, Richard kneeling beside him with haunted eyes, Sarah giving the medical team a rapid-fire assessment in terminology that betrayed her nursing background. "What happened?" Chief Bradford asked Dorothy, who stood clutching her handbag to her chest. The elderly woman shook her head sadly. "What happens when folks get too proud or too scared to ask for help? That poor child's been suffering a long time, William. Too long." As the paramedics lifted Kevin onto a stretcher, his small body seemed to disappear beneath the straps and blankets. One of them, Bill Jenkins, who'd gone to high school with Sarah, called out vital signs that made her face tighten with concern. BP 95/60, temperature 104.3, pulse 135, and thready. The emergency room at Lakefield General Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Kevin was wheeled through the automatic doors. Dr. Elizabeth Thompson met the gurney, her experienced eyes quickly assessing the small, trembling form before her. At 45, with prematurely silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, Dr. Thompson had the focused intensity of someone who'd seen too much, but hadn't lost her capacity to care. "What have we got?" she asked, falling into step beside the paramedics. 8-year-old male, severe scalp infection, temp 104.3, had a seizure at the scene, Bill recited. BP's low, pulse rapid and thready. Dr. Thompson lifted the bandage the paramedics had placed over Kevin's head and inhaled sharply. "Get him to trauma 2. I want a full blood panel, IV antibiotics, and cooling measures started immediately." Richard tried to follow, but a nurse gently blocked his path. "Sir, you need to stay in the waiting area while they work." "He's my nephew," Richard protested weakly, his voice catching. Chief Bradford placed a steady hand on Richard's shoulder. "Let them do their job, Richard. Then we need to talk." Sarah had followed in her own car, arriving just as Richard was being led to a small conference room off the ER waiting area. She caught Chief Bradford's eye and he nodded slightly, an unspoken permission for her to join them. The conference room was claustrophobic, beige walls, a scratched table, chairs that had seen better days. Richard sat with his head in his hands, looking smaller somehow, deflated. "I want to understand what happened," Chief Bradford began, his tone professional but not unkind. "How long has Kevin been sick?" Richard stared at his hands. "It started as just some scratching maybe 2 weeks ago. I thought it was dry skin from the cabin heater." "And you didn't think to take him to a doctor when it got worse?" Chief Bradford pressed. "Doctors," Richard's mouth twisted. "Last time I trusted doctors, they pumped me so full of pills I couldn't feel anything, couldn't even cry at my brother's funeral." Sarah leaned forward. "Richard, I understand being wary, but Kevin's condition is serious. That infection didn't happen overnight." Richard's eyes flashed. "You think I don't know that? You think I wanted this?" His voice broke. "I've tried everything, every damn thing I know." "Everything except proper medical care," Chief Bradford pointed out. A knock at the door interrupted them. "Doctor." Thompson entered, her face grave. "Mr. Peterson, we've started Kevin on IV antibiotics and fluids. The infection is severe. What we're seeing is an advanced case of folliculitis that's progressed to cellulitis of the scalp. There's also evidence of tinea capitis, a fungal infection." "In English, Doc?" Chief Bradford requested. "Kevin has a bacterial and fungal infection that started in the hair follicles but has spread to deeper layers of skin. We're concerned it may have entered his bloodstream, causing sepsis. That's what triggered the fever and seizure." Dr. Thompson fixed Richard with a steady gaze. "I need to ask, has Kevin been exposed to any unusual environments recently? Contaminated water, animal waste?" Richard swallowed hard. "We've been living at Clancy's old hunting cabin. The roof leaks in the back room where we sleep. There's some mold, but I've been cleaning it best I can." Dr. Thompson nodded, making notes. "And his hygiene routine?" "We have to haul water from the creek. The cabin's pump broke in December. I heat it on the wood stove, but it's not always—" Richard trailed off, the inadequacy of his care hanging in the air. "I see," Dr. Thompson said neutrally. "Mr. Peterson, I'm obligated to inform you that I've contacted Child Protective Services. The extent of Kevin's infection indicates prolonged neglect of his basic health needs." Richard lunged to his feet. "Neglect! I've done everything I could. You have no idea—" "Richard," Chief Bradford interrupted firmly. "Sit down." Surprisingly, Richard complied, collapsing back into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. "He's all I have," he whispered. Dr. Thompson's expression softened slightly. "We're going to do everything we can for Kevin, but I need you to be honest with me about anything else that might be affecting his health." Silence stretched between them until Richard finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Sometimes I can't sleep for days. I hear things, see things. The cabin, it gets to be too much, and I take Kevin to sleep in the truck. It's warmer there anyway." The admission hung in the air. Chief Bradford and Dr. Thompson exchanged glances. "When was the last time you saw your VA doctor, Richard?" Chief Bradford asked gently. "Year and a half ago, before we came here." Richard's hands were trembling. "The meds made everything worse. Couldn't work. Couldn't think straight. Couldn't protect Kevin." Sarah, who had been silent, suddenly asked, "Protect him from what?" Richard looked up, his eyes haunted. "From ending up like Michael." The name fell like a stone into still water. "Who's Michael?" Chief Bradford asked. Before Richard could answer, a nurse burst into the room. "Dr. Thompson, the boy's blood pressure is dropping. We need you now." Dr. Thompson was out the door in an instant. Richard tried to follow, but Chief Bradford held him back. "Let them work, Richard. I should be with him." Richard's voice rose in panic. "Right now, the best thing you can do for Kevin is cooperate with us," Chief Bradford said firmly. Richard's shoulders slumped in defeat as Chief Bradford guided him back to his chair. Sarah slipped out of the room, following the path Dr. Thompson had taken. The trauma room was a flurry of activity. Kevin lay unconscious, his small frame dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. Dr. Thompson barked orders as nurses moved with practiced efficiency. "BP's 80-40 and falling. Push another bolus of fluids and start dopamine." Sarah stood in the doorway, her nurses' training automatically cataloging the interventions, assessing Kevin's condition. It was bad, worse than she'd initially thought. The infection had clearly been festering for weeks, not days. "Sarah, I need you to step out," Dr. Thompson called without looking up. "Elizabeth, let me help. I was ER for 18 years. And now you're a witness in a potential child endangerment case," Dr. Thompson interrupted. "Please wait outside." Reluctantly, Sarah retreated to the hallway where she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The image of Kevin's infected scalp was burned into her memory, alongside the defeated look in Richard's eyes. Something about this situation felt different from the clear-cut neglect cases she'd seen as a nurse. A memory surfaced. Her own son Michael at 7, before the divorce, before her ex-husband won custody with his expensive lawyer and carefully constructed lies. Michael with a high fever, her ex refusing to waste money on doctors for a simple cold. The pneumonia that had nearly taken him. By the time she'd defied her husband and rushed Michael to the ER, he'd been almost as sick as Kevin was now. Her eyes snapped open as Chief Bradford approached. "They're booking Richard," he said quietly. "Child endangerment for now, pending Kevin's condition and the CPS investigation." "William, I don't think this is straightforward neglect," Sarah said. "There's something else going on here." Chief Bradford studied her face. "You're probably right. But right now that boy in there is fighting for his life because his guardian didn't get him basic medical care." "That's all I need to know at the moment." A social worker Sarah didn't recognize walked briskly past them toward the trauma room, clipboard in hand. Through the door's window, Sarah could see Dr. Thompson nodding as a nurse shaved a portion of Kevin's scalp, revealing the full extent of the infection. "They'll be looking for next of kin," Chief Bradford said. "Does Richard have any family that you know of?" "He mentioned someone named Michael. Sounded like a brother." Chief Bradford nodded. "I'll run a background check. In the meantime," he hesitated. "Sarah, I know that look. Don't get too involved. This isn't your fight." Sarah thought of Kevin's silent suffering in her barber chair, of the way Richard had whispered, "He's all I have. Maybe it should be somebody's," she replied. The fluorescent lights of Lakefield General cast harsh shadows across the waiting room as night settled over the small town. Sarah sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, a cooling cup of vending machine coffee clutched between her hands. Across from her, Dorothy Wilson knitted steadily, the click of her needles providing a rhythmic counterpoint to the hospital's beeps and hums. "You should go home, get some sleep," Dorothy said without looking up from her work. "Sitting here won't make that boy heal any faster." Sarah shook her head. "I can't leave him alone. He doesn't have anyone else right now." Dorothy's needles paused. "You hardly know that child, Sarah Miller. What's really keeping you here?" Before Sarah could answer, Dr. Thompson appeared in the doorway looking exhausted. She'd been working on Kevin for nearly 6 hours. "How is he?" Sarah asked, rising to her feet. "Stable for now," Dr. Thompson replied, dropping into a chair beside them. "We've drained the worst infection sites and started him on a powerful cocktail of antibiotics." "The next 48 hours will be critical." "Will there be permanent damage?" Dorothy asked, her needles still. Dr. Thompson sighed. "It's too early to tell. We're monitoring for signs of septic shock or neurological complications from the high fever. He's malnourished and anemic too, which isn't helping his body fight the infection." "Can I see him?" Sarah asked. "He's sedated," Dr. Thompson replied. "But yes, briefly, he's been moved to pediatric ICU, room 212. As Sarah turned to go, Dr. Thompson caught her arm. "Sarah, CPS is sending someone first thing tomorrow. They'll want to talk to you as the reporting party." Sarah nodded. "I'll be here." The pediatric ICU was dimly lit, the nurses moving quietly between rooms like ghosts. In room 212, Kevin lay still beneath a thin hospital blanket, his small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. His head was partially shaved and bandaged, with drainage tubes emerging from beneath the gauze. An IV stand beside the bed delivered fluids and antibiotics, while monitors tracked his vital signs with muted beeps. Sarah approached slowly, taking in the details: the hollows beneath his eyes, the chapped lips, the protruding collarbones visible above his hospital gown. How had she not noticed how thin he was when he sat in her barber chair? How had no one in Lakefield noticed this child wasting away? "I'm sorry," she whispered, gently taking his limp hand. "I should have realized sooner." A nurse Sarah recognized from her own hospital days, Angela Peterson, entered quietly to check Kevin's vitals. "Poor little thing," Angela murmured. "Dr. Thompson said he's been living in some abandoned cabin in the middle of winter." "Clancy's old hunting cabin," Sarah confirmed. "It's barely fit for weekend trips in summer, let alone winter living." Angela shook her head as she recorded Kevin's temperature. "The uncle's in custody." "Chief Bradford arrested him a few hours ago? Child endangerment charges." "Well, from what I've seen of this infection, that's putting it mildly." Angela adjusted Kevin's blanket. "Dr. Thompson had to scrape away necrotic tissue. Some of these infection sites go nearly to the skull. It's a miracle he didn't develop meningitis." Sarah's stomach clenched. "Has he been conscious at all?" "In and out. He asked for his uncle once, then went back under." Angela's expression softened. "Are you staying? I can bring an extra blanket. That chair is not comfortable, but it reclines a bit." "I'm staying," Sarah confirmed. After Angela left, Sarah settled into the chair beside Kevin's bed. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, coating Lakefield in a deceptive blanket of pristine white. Morning arrived with the shift change, bringing a flurry of activity to Kevin's room. Dr. Thompson returned, accompanied by a tall, thin woman who introduced herself as Patricia Reynolds from Child Protective Services. "Mr. Miller, I understand you're the one who reported the situation," Patricia said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "Could we speak privately?" They settled in a small consultation room where Sarah recounted the previous day's events. Richard bringing Kevin for a haircut, discovering the infection, the confrontation, and Kevin's seizure. "And in your professional opinion as a former nurse, how long would it take for an infection to reach that stage?" Patricia asked, taking notes. "At least 2 weeks, probably longer," Sarah replied. The pattern of infection suggested poor hygiene combined with some kind of environmental exposure, mold, contaminated water, something like that. "Had you noticed any previous signs of neglect in your interactions with Kevin or his uncle?" Sarah hesitated. "I'd only seen them a few times." Richard kept to himself. Kevin was quiet, which isn't unusual for his age. Looking back, there were signs. He was too thin, his clothes were always too big, and he seemed wary, like he was expecting disappointment. Patricia nodded. "We're trying to locate any family members. Do you know if there's a mother in the picture?" Richard never mentioned one. He did reference someone named Michael, though. Sounded like a brother. "We'll look into it," Patricia said, closing her notebook. "In the meantime, Kevin will remain in protective custody. Once he's medically cleared, we'll need to place him in emergency foster care until we can locate relatives." The thought of Kevin being handed over to strangers made Sarah's chest tighten. "What about Richard? Will he have any visitation rights?" "That depends on the court and the outcome of our investigation." Patricia's tone was neutral. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check with Dr. Thompson about Kevin's prognosis." After Patricia left, Sarah remained in the consultation room, a familiar weight settling in her stomach. She knew the system, had seen it work both miracles and tragedies during her nursing career. Sometimes removing a child from an unsafe home was the best possible outcome. Other times, the system inflicted its own kind of damage. Chief Bradford stood in the observation room of the Lakefield police station, watching Richard Peterson through the one-way glass. Richard sat at the metal table, staring at his folded hands, shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't made his phone call, hadn't done anything but ask about Kevin's condition every hour on the hour. "He say anything yet?" asked Deputy Mark Stevens, entering with 2 cups of coffee. Chief Bradford shook his head, accepting one of the cups. "Not since we booked him. Background check came back, though." Richard Peterson, 42, former Army Ranger, 3 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge in 2018 following an IED incident. His brother, Michael Peterson, served in the same unit, died by suicide in 2020. PTSD, Mark guessed. Almost certainly, Chief Bradford confirmed. VA records show he was prescribed medication but stopped filling prescriptions about 18 months ago. That's when he and Kevin dropped off the grid. No fixed address, no school records, nothing until they showed up here 9 months ago. What about the boy's mother? No mention in any of the records. I'm still waiting on birth certificate information. Chief Bradford took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. Time to see if he'll talk to me. Richard didn't look up when Chief Bradford entered the interrogation room, didn't acknowledge him until Chief Bradford placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "How's Kevin?" Richard asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Stable," Chief Bradford replied, taking the seat across from him. "The doctors are doing everything they can." Richard nodded slightly, relief briefly softening his haggard features. "Can I see him?" "Not right now, Richard. You're in custody and Kevin's in protective care." Richard's hands curled into fists, then slowly relaxed. "I never meant for him to get sick." "I believe you," Chief Bradford said. And he did. The despair in Richard's eyes wasn't the calculated remorse of an abuser caught in the act. It was the devastation of a man who'd failed at the one thing that mattered to him. But intent doesn't change the fact that your nephew nearly died from a preventable infection. I need to understand how things got to this point. For a long moment, Richard remained silent. Then, as if a dam had broken, words began to spill out. "After Michael died, I couldn't. Everything fell apart. The meds made me feel like I was underwater. Couldn't protect Kevin that way. So we left, just drove until the money ran out." Richard's voice was flat, emotionless. "Found the cabin. Owner said we could stay if I did repairs. It was supposed to be temporary." "And Kevin's mother?" Richard's jaw tightened. "There isn't one. Not anymore. Richard, we need to contact any family Kevin might have. If there's someone who could take him—" "Jennifer," Richard interrupted. "My sister. She's in Vermont. Elementary school teacher." He recited a phone number from memory. "She'll take him. She's good, safe." Chief Bradford wrote the information down. "Why didn't you reach out to her before things got this bad?" Richard's gaze dropped to the table. "We had a fight about Kevin, about how I was raising him. She said I needed help, that I wasn't stable enough." A bitter smile twisted his lips. Guess she was right. Sarah returned to Kevin's room to find Dr. Thompson changing his bandages. The infection sites looked angry and raw, but the yellowish discharge had lessened. "Good signs," Dr. Thompson noted. "The antibiotics are working. Fever's down to 101.2. "Has he been awake at all?" Sarah asked. "Briefly. He asked for water, then fell back asleep. That's normal with the medication he's on." As if on cue, Kevin's eyelids fluttered, his gaze unfocused at first but eventually settling on Sarah. "Miss Sarah?" he whispered, voice scratchy from disuse. "I'm here, sweetheart," she replied, moving closer to the bed. "You're in the hospital, but you're going to be okay." Kevin's eyes darted around the room. "Where's Uncle Rick?" Sarah and Dr. Thompson exchanged glances. "Your uncle can't be here right now," Sarah said carefully. "But you're not alone. I'm staying right here with you." Kevin's lower lip trembled. "Is he mad at me?" "No, honey," Sarah assured him, her heart breaking. "He's not mad at you. Why would you think that?" "Because I told," Kevin whispered, a tear sliding down his cheek, "about my head hurting. He said we can't trust doctors, that they'd take me away." Dr. Thompson stepped out quietly, giving them privacy. "Kevin, you did exactly the right thing," Sarah said firmly. "When something hurts, you should tell someone, always." Kevin's eyes were already drooping again, the medication pulling him back toward sleep. "Uncle Rick hurts too," he murmured. "All the time, but he never tells." In the afternoon, Chief Bradford arrived at the hospital with news. "We reached Jennifer Peterson in Vermont. She's driving up. Should be here by tomorrow morning." "Richard's sister?" Sarah asked. They were in the hospital cafeteria, both nursing cups of coffee that tasted like warmed-over cardboard. Chief Bradford nodded. "Elementary school teacher in Burlington. Sounds solid." "She's been looking for Richard and Kevin for almost a year. Said Richard cut off contact after an argument about Kevin's welfare. What happens to Richard now?" "Arraignment tomorrow. Given the severity of Kevin's condition, the DA is pushing for felony charges." Chief Bradford rubbed his eyes tiredly. "Between you and me, I think he needs a psychiatric hospital more than jail, but that's not my call." Sarah thought about what Kevin had said earlier. "William, I think there's more to this story. Kevin mentioned something about his uncle being in pain but not telling anyone. And when I was examining his scalp, I noticed these strange marks, not from the infection, but like someone had been applying something to his head over and over in the same pattern." Chief Bradford frowned. "What kind of marks?" "Circular, about the size of a quarter. 5 or 6 of them across the back of his scalp. Could be from some home remedy Richard was using." "Maybe," Sarah conceded, "but something doesn't add up. I want to see where they were living." Chief Bradford's eyebrows rose. "The cabin? Why?" "Call it intuition. If we're going to understand what happened to Kevin, we need to see the conditions he was living in." Chief Bradford hesitated, then nodded. "I'll drive you out there, but it's an active crime scene, Sarah. You can observe, that's it." Clancy's hunting cabin sat a half-mile off the main road, accessible only by a narrow dirt track now covered in 6 inches of snow. Chief Bradford's police SUV made it within 100 yards before they had to continue on foot. The cabin itself was smaller than Sarah had imagined, a single-room structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered around the perimeter. "County forensics team was here this morning," Chief Bradford explained, lifting the tape for Sarah to duck under. "They've documented everything so we can enter." The interior was cold and dark, the air heavy with the smell of mold and unwashed bodies. A wood stove in the center of the room provided the only heat source, its ashes long cold. 2 makeshift beds, a cot for Richard and a pile of blankets on a camp mattress for Kevin, occupied one corner. A camping cooler served as their refrigerator. A plastic basin beside the wood stove held water tinged faintly brown. "Creek water," Chief Bradford explained, gesturing to the basin. "The cabin's well pump broke months ago." Sarah moved carefully through the space, taking in details. A stack of library books beside Kevin's bed, all advanced for his age. A row of pill bottles on a shelf, their labels worn but recognizable as VA-prescribed psychiatric medications. A collection of drawings tacked to one wall, clearly Kevin's work. She examined the drawings closely. Most depicted nature scenes, trees, animals, the creek behind the cabin, but one caught her eye, a crude but detailed sketch of a man, presumably Richard, standing guard outside a small structure while dark, spidery creatures approached from all sides. "William, look at this," she called. Chief Bradford studied the drawing. "Kids with trauma often express it through art." Probably his way of processing their situation. "Maybe," Sarah murmured, not convinced. She continued her inspection, moving to a small table cluttered with jars of dried herbs, tins of salve, and crude implements for grinding and mixing. "What is all this?" she wondered aloud, opening one of the tins. The salve inside had a pungent, medicinal smell. "Looks like Richard's home pharmacy," Chief Bradford replied. "The forensics team took samples of everything." Beneath the table, Sarah spotted a leather-bound book. She carefully extracted it, brushing off a layer of dust. "His journal?" Chief Bradford asked, peering over her shoulder. No, Sarah replied, flipping through pages of meticulous handwriting interspersed with botanical drawings. It's some kind of family remedy book. These are recipes, herbal preparations. She paused at a page headed Drawing Salve for Infections, with a list of ingredients: activated charcoal, clay, plantain, and several other herbs. This is what he was using on Kevin, she realized. Traditional drawing salve. It's meant to pull infection out through the skin. My grandmother used to make something similar. So he was trying to treat the infection, Chief Bradford acknowledged. But why not just take the kid to a doctor? Sarah continued turning pages until she reached one with a different handwriting, more recent entries. Richard's journal had been incorporated into the back of the remedy book. The entries were disjointed, paranoid. They're watching the clinics. Can't risk taking Kay, they'll find us like they found Michael. Meds running low. Can't think straight without them, can't function with them. Need to find another way. Dream of bugs again, crawling, burrowing. Kay says his head itches. Check for lice, find nothing. Apply grandmother's salve just in case. Sarah closed the book, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the cabin's temperature. William, I don't think Richard was neglecting Kevin out of carelessness. I think he was genuinely trying to protect him from threats that existed only in his mind. Chief Bradford took the journal, skimming the entries with a deepening frown. PTSD, paranoid delusions. The VA should have been monitoring him more closely. The system failed both of them, Sarah said quietly. As they prepared to leave, something caught Sarah's eye. A small backpack tucked under Kevin's bed. She pulled it out, finding it filled with the boy's meager possessions: a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a small flashlight, and a worn teddy bear missing one eye. I'm taking this to him, she decided, clutching the backpack to her chest. He should have something familiar when he wakes up. Chief Bradford didn't argue. As they made their way back through the snow to the cruiser, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Richard and Kevin living in that squalid cabin, both prisoners of Richard's deteriorating mental state, yet bound by a desperate, protective love. Back at the hospital, Kevin was awake and sitting up slightly, picking at a tray of hospital food. His eyes brightened when he saw Sarah. "You came back," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Of course I did," Sarah replied, setting his backpack on the bed. "I brought some of your things." Kevin's face lit up as he pulled out the one-eyed teddy bear. "Captain Cuddles!" He hugged the toy tightly, then looked up at Sarah with sudden concern. "Did you see Uncle Rick? Is he okay?" "Your uncle is safe," Sarah assured him, choosing her words carefully. "And guess what? Your Aunt Jennifer is driving all the way from Vermont to see you. She'll be here tomorrow." "Aunt Jenny?" Kevin's eyes widened. "Uncle Rick said she didn't want us anymore." "That's not true, sweetheart. She's been looking for you for a long time." Kevin's brow furrowed as he processed this information. "Is she mad at Uncle Rick?" "She's worried about both of you," Sarah replied honestly. "Everyone is." Kevin clutched Captain Cuddles closer. "Uncle Rick tries really hard," he said, his voice small but insistent. "He reads to me every night, even when his head gets bad. And he always makes sure I eat, even if he doesn't." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Kevin's IV. "What do you mean, when his head gets bad?" Kevin hesitated, glancing at the door as if afraid someone might overhear. "Sometimes Uncle Rick sees things that aren't there. He says there are bugs trying to get in his head like they got Uncle Michael. That's why we had to leave our old house, so the bugs wouldn't find us." The pieces were falling into place. Richard's paranoia, the isolation, the refusal to seek medical help. Even the strange circular marks on Kevin's scalp made sense now. Richard had been applying his homemade salve to draw out imaginary parasites. "Kevin, did your uncle ever hurt you? Not by accident, but on purpose?" Kevin looked shocked by the question. "No, Uncle Rick would never. He gets scared sometimes, and he yells, but not at me, at the bugs." His voice dropped to a whisper. I pretend I can see them too, so he doesn't feel so alone. The night dragged on in Kevin's hospital room, marked by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the quiet footsteps of nurses during hourly checks. Sarah dozed in the recliner chair, waking at every small sound. Around 3 o'clock a.m., she opened her eyes to find Kevin awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "My head feels funny. Not hurting exactly, just buzzing. That's the medicine working," Sarah explained, moving to sit on the edge of his bed. "It's fighting the infection." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "Is Uncle Rick in jail?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She'd hoped to delay this conversation until morning, when Jennifer would be here, when Kevin was stronger. But his blue eyes were clear and alert, demanding truth. "Yes," she admitted gently, "but it's complicated. Kevin, your uncle is sick too, just in a different way than you. When people go through very scary things, sometimes their minds try to protect them by changing how they see the world. Your uncle saw some terrible things in the war, and it hurt him deep inside, the kind of hurt doctors can't fix with bandages." Kevin nodded solemnly. "Like Uncle Michael. Uncle Rick says the bugs got him so bad he had to go away forever." Sarah's heart constricted. How do you explain suicide to an 8-year-old who's already seen too much? "Your uncle was hurting very badly inside. Your Uncle Rick didn't want the same thing to happen to you, so he tried to protect you the best way he knew how. By keeping me away from doctors," Kevin concluded. "He said they'd take me away." His small hand found Sarah's. He was right. Before Sarah could respond, Kevin's eyes grew heavy, the medication pulling him back toward sleep. "Don't let them hurt Uncle Rick," he murmured as he drifted off. "He's already hurting enough." Dawn broke cold and clear over Lakefield. Jennifer Peterson arrived at the hospital just after 8 o'clock a.m., having driven through the night from Burlington. At 40, she shared Richard's blue eyes and square jaw, but where his features had been hardened by trauma, hers remained open, expressive. She wore practical clothes, jeans, boots, a thick sweater under a down coat, and carried a small duffel bag. "I came as soon as I could," she told Chief Bradford and Sarah, who met her in the hospital lobby. "How's Kevin? Can I see him?" "Dr. Thompson is examining him now," Chief Bradford explained. "His condition is stabilized, but he's still quite ill. The infection was extensive." Jennifer's composure cracked slightly. "I should have tried harder to find them. After our fight, Richard changed his phone number, moved without telling anyone. I filed missing person reports, hired a private investigator, but it was like they'd vanished." "What exactly did you fight about?" Sarah asked gently. Jennifer sank into a lobby chair, the exhaustion of her long drive catching up with her. "Richard's mental health. After Michael died, Richard spiraled. He was having paranoid episodes, talking about government surveillance, refusing to take his medication. I begged him to get help for Kevin's sake, if not his own." She twisted the strap of her duffel bag. "He accused me of trying to take Kevin away, said I was one of them. That was the last time I saw them." "Jennifer," Chief Bradford said carefully, "there's something you should know before you see Kevin. He's been told you're coming, but he's confused about the situation. He knows his uncle is in custody, but not the full extent of Richard's condition." Jennifer nodded. "I understand. I won't say anything to upset him." "There's one more thing," Sarah added. "Kevin mentioned that Richard told him you didn't want them anymore. He might be wary at first." Pain flashed across Jennifer's face. "Richard said that—" "After everything I did to try to find them?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It doesn't matter. What matters is Kevin knows he's not alone." Dr. Thompson approached, clipboard in hand. "Miss Peterson, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, Kevin's physician. His morning assessment shows continued improvement. The antibiotics are working and his fever is nearly gone. If you'd like to see him, he's awake now." Jennifer stood, smoothing her sweater with trembling hands. "Thank you. I'm ready." Kevin was sitting up in bed, listlessly pushing breakfast cereal around in a plastic bowl when they entered. He looked up, his spoon freezing mid-motion as his eyes locked on Jennifer. "Aunt Jenny?" His voice was small, disbelieving. Jennifer moved forward slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Hi, Firefly," she said, using an old nickname. "It's been a while." Kevin's bowl clattered to his tray as he launched himself forward, arms outstretched. Jennifer caught him in a careful embrace, mindful of his IV and bandages. "You came," he whispered against her shoulder. "Uncle Rick said you were angry, that you didn't want us." "Oh, Kevin," Jennifer's voice broke. "I have never, ever stopped wanting you. I've been looking everywhere for you and your uncle." Sarah and Chief Bradford exchanged glances, silently agreeing to give the reunited family members privacy. As they stepped into the hallway, Patricia Reynolds from CPS approached, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Peterson arrived?" she asked. Chief Bradford nodded. "They're having a moment. Best to give them some time." "Of course, I'll need to interview her regarding potential guardianship, but it can wait an hour." Patricia consulted her clipboard. "I should update you both. Richard Peterson's arraignment is scheduled for 2 p.m. today. The charges are serious. Child endangerment resulting in substantial harm is a felony carrying up to 10 years. Sarah winced. Has he been evaluated by a psychiatrist?" "The court appointed one this morning, Dr. Reeves from the county mental health department." Patricia hesitated. "Preliminary findings suggest severe PTSD with psychotic features. Dr. Reeves is recommending Richard be remanded to a psychiatric facility for treatment rather than jail, but ultimately it's the judge's decision." "What about Kevin's custody?" Chief Bradford asked. "If Ms. Peterson passes our background check and home study, she could be granted temporary guardianship as early as next week. Given the family connection and her stable situation, it's the ideal placement." Patricia's professional demeanor softened slightly. "It's a better outcome than we often see in these cases." After Patricia left, Sarah turned to Chief Bradford. "I need to be at Richard's arraignment." Chief Bradford raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "You've done your part, Sarah. Kevin's safe. He has family." "It's in the system's hands now." "The system failed them once already," Sarah argued. "I want to make sure the judge understands what really happened here. This wasn't a case of willful neglect. It was a mentally ill veteran trying to care for his nephew in the only way his damaged mind could manage." Chief Bradford studied her face. "You found something else at the cabin, didn't you? Something you didn't tell me." Sarah hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, one of Kevin's drawings she'd taken from the cabin wall. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands, a larger one labeled Uncle Rick, with spirals around his head, and a smaller one labeled Me, with similar spirals starting to form. "Kevin didn't just have a bacterial infection, William. He had lice, a severe infestation that had been partially treated with Richard's homemade remedies. In Richard's delusional state, he saw the lice as the same bugs he believed had infected his own mind. He was trying to save Kevin from what he thought killed his brother." Chief Bradford took the drawing, his expression grave. "This changes the narrative, but not necessarily the outcome. Richard still endangered Kevin's life, regardless of his intentions." "I know," Sarah acknowledged, "but intention matters, especially in sentencing. Richard needs treatment, not punishment." The Lakefield Courthouse was a stately brick building at the center of town, its wooden interior polished by generations of footsteps. Courtroom 2 was nearly empty for the arraignment. Just a few lawyers, a court reporter, a bailiff standing at attention. Sarah slipped into a back bench just as Richard was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His wrists were shackled, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked broken, diminished. Judge Howard Grayson, a stern man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for fairness, called the court to order. The proceedings moved quickly through the formalities. Charges read, rights explained, plea entered. "Not guilty by reason of mental defect," stated the public defender, a young woman who looked barely out of law school. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Daniel Townsend, requested Richard be held without bail, citing the severity of Kevin's injuries and the risk of flight. The public defender argued for release to a psychiatric facility, presenting Dr. Reeves's evaluation. Judge Grayson listened impassively, then turned his attention to Richard. "Mr. Peterson, do you understand the charges against you?" Richard raised his head slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand that your son—" "Nephew," Richard interrupted, his voice hollow. "Kevin is my nephew, my brother's son." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah straightened in her seat. This was the first she'd heard of this relationship. Judge Grayson consulted the file before him, frowning. "The birth certificate lists you as the father." "I adopted him after Michael died," Richard explained, speaking with unexpected clarity. "He was only 4. His mother had already abandoned him. I promised Michael I'd keep him safe." The judge nodded slowly. "I see." He leaned forward. "And yet, Mr. Peterson, this child nearly died under your care. How do you reconcile that with your promise to your brother?" Richard's composure cracked. "I tried," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Everything was fine until the bugs came. They got Michael first. I could see them starting to get Kevin, too. I had to keep him away from the doctors because they wouldn't understand. They'd think I was crazy." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Grayson removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Peterson, I'm taking Dr. Reeves's recommendation under advisement. You will be remanded to the state psychiatric hospital for evaluation and treatment pending trial. Bail is denied." As the bailiff led Richard away, his eyes met Sarah's briefly. There was a flicker of recognition, then confusion, before he was gone. Outside the courtroom, Sarah found herself face to face with Prosecutor Townsend. "You're the barber who reported this," he stated, not a question. "Yes," she confirmed, "and I want you to know that Richard Peterson isn't a monster. He's a sick man who needed help and didn't get it." Townsend's expression remained impassive. "Noble sentiment, Ms. Miller, but my job is to protect children from harm, regardless of the perpetrator's mental state." "Even if that someone was fighting a war in his own mind?" Sarah challenged. "Even if he genuinely believed he was protecting his nephew?" Townsend gathered his papers. "That's for a jury to decide." The revelation that Kevin was actually Richard's nephew rather than his son sent ripples through Lakefield. By evening, the story had spread through the town like wildfire, each retelling adding layers of speculation and judgment. Sarah heard the whispers as she stopped for groceries at Wilson's Market, felt the stares following her down the aisles. "There she is, the one who called the cops on that poor veteran. I heard the boy nearly died from some kind of brain infection. My cousin works at the hospital, says the kid's head was eaten up with parasites. Can you imagine?" Sarah kept her head high, her cart moving steadily forward. Let them talk. They hadn't seen Kevin's wounds, hadn't felt his burning fever, hadn't heard his whispered apologies for the crime of being in pain. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere had changed. Kevin had been moved from the ICU to a regular pediatric room, a cheerful space with cartoon characters painted on the walls. His color had improved dramatically, and though bandages still covered much of his scalp, the angry redness around the edges had faded. Jennifer sat beside his bed, reading aloud from a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. She paused mid-sentence when Sarah entered. "Look who's here," she said, smiling warmly. "Ms. Miller came to check on you." Kevin's face brightened. "They took the tubes out," he announced proudly, holding up his arm where only a small bandage covered the former IV site. "And Dr. Thompson says I can have pudding with dinner." "That's wonderful news," Sarah replied, setting a small gift bag on his bedside table. "I brought you something from your uncle's cabin. Thought you might want it while you're getting better." Kevin reached into the bag and pulled out a leather-bound sketchbook and set of colored pencils. His eyes widened. "My drawing stuff, I thought I lost it." He clutched the sketchbook to his chest, then opened it to show Jennifer. "Look, Aunt Jenny, these are all the animals I saw at the cabin. This is the fox that lived under the porch, and these are the birds that came for the seeds Uncle Rick put out." Jennifer examined the drawings with genuine admiration. "These are amazing, Kevin. You've got a real talent." As Kevin eagerly flipped through his sketches, Jennifer pulled Sarah aside. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for the sketchbook, but for everything. The doctors told me if you hadn't noticed the infection when you did—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "How is he really doing?" Sarah asked. Jennifer glanced back at Kevin, who was already absorbed in starting a new drawing. "Physically, he's improving faster than they expected. Emotionally," she sighed, "he keeps asking about Richard. I've told him his uncle is getting special help, but I don't know how to explain that he might not be coming home anytime soon." "Has Patricia from CPS spoken with you about custody arrangements?" Jennifer nodded. "They're fast-tracking the process given the circumstances. I'll need to take a family leave from teaching, but my principal is supportive. The bigger challenge will be helping Kevin adjust. He's been through so much." Sarah hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her since the arraignment. "Did you know that Richard had legally adopted Kevin? In court today, he said he promised Michael he'd raise him after his death." Jennifer's expression clouded. "Michael and Richard were inseparable growing up, joined the Army together, served in the same unit. When Michael's girlfriend got pregnant, she wanted nothing to do with the baby. Michael raised Kevin alone for the first 4 years, with Richard helping whenever he was stateside." Her voice softened with memory. "Then came that last deployment. Michael came home different, withdrawn, haunted. He took his own life." Sarah finished gently. Jennifer nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Richard was devastated. He blamed himself for not seeing the signs, for not saving his brother. Taking in Kevin was his way of making amends. And he was a good father, Sarah, before the PTSD got worse, before the delusion started. Richard was patient and loving. He taught Kevin to fish, to draw, to identify constellations. The Richard you're describing bears little resemblance to the man who brought Kevin to my shop," Sarah observed. "Mental illness stole my brother from us," Jennifer said simply, "just as surely as death took Michael." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Thompson, who entered with a tablet in hand and a serious expression. "Ms. Peterson, Ms. Miller, may I speak with you in the hallway?" Kevin looked up from his drawing, instantly alert to the change in atmosphere. "Is something wrong with me?" "No, sweetheart," Dr. Thompson assured him. "I just need to discuss some boring adult things with your aunt. Nurse Jenny will be in to check your bandages while we talk." In the hallway, Dr. Thompson didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Kevin's latest blood work shows a secondary infection we missed initially. It's a form of Bartonellosis, commonly known as cat scratch fever, though it can also be transmitted through lice. Left untreated, it can cause neurological complications." Jennifer paled. "Is that why he's been having headaches?" "Likely, yes. We're adjusting his antibiotic regimen to target this infection as well. He'll need to stay in the hospital at least another week." "Will there be permanent damage?" Sarah asked, remembering how Richard had described the bugs getting into his brother's head, into his own mind. Dr. Thompson's expression was carefully neutral. "It's too early to say. The infection affected his lymph nodes and appears to have reached his central nervous system, but children are remarkably resilient. With proper treatment and monitoring, we're hopeful for a full recovery." After Dr. Thompson left, Jennifer leaned against the wall, momentarily overwhelmed. I can't help wondering if Richard sensed something was wrong with Kevin beyond what was visible. If some part of him recognized the infection was affecting Kevin's brain, and that's why his delusions about bugs intensified. It's possible, Sarah acknowledged. PTSD doesn't destroy intelligence or intuition. It distorts perception. A nurse emerged from Kevin's room, signaling they could return inside. Kevin had fallen asleep, his sketchbook opened beside him. The drawing he'd been working on showed 3 figures holding hands, a man, a boy, and a woman, standing before a small house. He'd labeled them Uncle Rick, me, and Aunt Jenny. Jennifer gently closed the sketchbook, her hand lingering on the cover. "He still believes we'll all be together somehow," she whispered. "How do I tell him that might never happen?" "Maybe you don't have to, not yet," Sarah suggested. "Right now he needs to focus on healing. The hard truths can wait." As if on cue, Kevin stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked disoriented for a moment, then focused on Jennifer. "I dreamed about the new house," he murmured sleepily. "The one in Vermont. Uncle Rick was there too. He wasn't scared anymore." Jennifer smoothed his hair away from the bandages. "That sounds like a nice dream, Firefly." "It wasn't a dream," Kevin insisted with the peculiar certainty of children. "It was going to happen. You'll see." Jennifer met Sarah's eyes over Kevin's head, a silent communication passing between them. They both recognized the dangerous territory of false hope, but neither had the heart to contradict him. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared to leave, Jennifer walked her to the elevator. "The doctors say if Kevin continues improving, he might be released next weekend. I booked a motel room until then, but I'll need to get back to Burlington to prepare for his arrival." "You're both welcome to stay at my place," Sarah offered impulsively. "I have a spare bedroom, and it would be more comfortable than a motel." Jennifer looked surprised. "That's incredibly generous, but we've imposed on you enough already." "It's not an imposition," Sarah insisted. "Besides, I made a promise to Kevin that I wouldn't leave him, and I intend to keep it." As the elevator doors closed between them, Sarah was struck by how quickly her life had changed. 3 days ago, Jennifer and Kevin Peterson had been strangers. Now, somehow, their welfare had become intertwined with her own. The Lakefield State Psychiatric Hospital stood on a hill overlooking the town, a sprawling brick complex that had once been a tuberculosis sanatorium in the early 1900s. Despite renovations over the decades, it retained an institutional grimness, its windows small and barred, its grounds enclosed by a high fence. Sarah pulled into the visitors' parking lot, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She hadn't planned to visit Richard. Her involvement should have ended once Kevin was safe, once Jennifer arrived to take custody. Yet here she was, 3 days after the arraignment, signing in at the front desk and surrendering her purse and phone for inspection. "Mr. Peterson doesn't get many visitors," remarked the intake nurse, an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Just his lawyer, and she was only here once." "How is he doing?" Sarah asked, pinning the visitor badge to her sweater. The nurse gave her a measured look. "As well as can be expected. Dr. Reeves has him on a new medication regimen. He's been cooperative." She buzzed Sarah through a set of heavy doors. "Visiting room is at the end of this hall. Officer Clark will escort you." Richard was already seated at a table in the visiting room when Sarah entered. He wore hospital-issued clothes, loose gray pants and a blue shirt, and his hair had been cut short, revealing a gauntness to his face that his beard had previously concealed. He looked up as she approached, confusion flickering across his features. "You're the barber," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "The one who called the police?" Sarah sat across from him. "Yes, my name is Sarah Miller." Richard's gaze dropped to the table. You saved Kevin's life. The doctor saved him. I just got him to them in time." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of the guard shifting position near the door. Finally, Richard spoke again, his words carefully measured as if each required great effort. "How is he?" "Improving every day," Sarah replied. "The infection is responding to antibiotics. He's eating better, gaining strength. His Aunt Jennifer is with him." Richard nodded slightly. "Jenny's good. Steady. She'll take care of him." "She said you were a good father to him," Sarah ventured. "Before everything." A shadow crossed Richard's face. "I tried to be. After Michael died, Kevin was all I had left. I promised I'd keep him safe." His hands curled into fists on the table. "Instead, I nearly killed him." "You were sick, Richard. You still are, but you're getting help now." Richard laughed, a hollow sound without humor. "Help? Is that what this is?" He gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "They've got me on so many meds I can barely string a sentence together, but at least the bugs are quiet." Sarah leaned forward. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to try to remember. When did Kevin first start getting sick, not just the scalp infection, but before that? Was he having headaches, fatigue?" Richard's brow furrowed in concentration. "He started getting tired a lot, maybe 2 months ago. Said his head hurt. I thought it was from reading in bad light. The cabin was always dark." He paused, struggling to organize his thoughts. "There was one night he woke up crying, said he could feel things crawling on him. I checked him over, found some bugs in his hair." "Lice," Sarah clarified. Richard nodded. "I cleaned him up best I could, used my grandmother's remedies, but they kept coming back." His eyes briefly cleared, clouded with remembered fear. "And then Kevin started talking about his head feeling buzzy, just like Michael used to say, just like I feel when the meds wear off. I knew then they were trying to get him too. The same bugs that got Michael, that got me." "The buzzing Kevin described was real," Sarah said gently. "Dr. Thompson found a secondary infection, Bartonellosis. It can cause neurological symptoms, including the sensation of buzzing or tingling." Richard stared at her. "Real bugs. Not just in my head?" "A bacterial infection, yes, transmitted through the lice. If you hadn't been treating the lice, even with your homemade remedies, it might have been much worse." Something shifted in Richard's expression, a glimmer of validation amid the confusion and guilt. "I knew something was wrong, even through the fog. I knew he was really sick, but I was so afraid they'd take him if I brought him to a doctor." "And now they have," Sarah acknowledged softly. Richard's shoulders slumped. "I failed him. Failed Michael." "You did your best with the tools you had," Sarah countered. "No one can ask more than that." Their conversation was interrupted by the guard announcing that visiting time was ending. As Sarah stood to leave, Richard caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly gentle. "Will you tell him something for me?" he asked, an urgency in his voice. "Of course. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't fight the bugs better. Tell him—" Richard's voice broke. "Tell him Captain Cuddles is keeping watch. He'll understand." The drive from the psychiatric hospital back to Lakefield General gave Sarah time to process her conversation with Richard. The man she'd met today was markedly different from the defensive, paranoid uncle who'd brought Kevin to her shop. With proper medication, the fog of delusion had lifted enough to reveal the person beneath. Damaged, yes, but also capable of genuine love and remorse. When she arrived at Kevin's room, she found him sitting up in bed, an untouched tray of lunch before him. His expression brightened at the sight of her. "Miss Sarah, did you bring more drawing stuff?" "Not today, buddy," she replied, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I went to see your uncle." Kevin's eyes widened. "You did? Is he okay? When can I see him?" Sarah chose her words carefully. He's getting special medicine to help clear the bugs from his head. It makes him tired, but he's doing better." She paused, gauging Kevin's reaction. "He wanted me to tell you that he's sorry he couldn't fight the bugs better and that Captain Cuddles is keeping watch." Kevin clutched his teddy bear closer. "Captain Cuddles was supposed to protect me when Uncle Rick couldn't," he explained solemnly. "He has magic eyes that can see the bugs before they get too close." The simple, childish belief broke Sarah's heart. Even in his delusions, Richard had created a protection mechanism for his nephew, a way for Kevin to feel safe when Richard himself was at his most vulnerable. "Your uncle loves you very much," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "He did the best he could." Kevin nodded, his expression suddenly older than his years. "I know. The bugs were getting him too bad. That's why we had to live in the woods away from people. Uncle Rick said people wouldn't understand about the bugs." "And was he right? Did people not understand?" Kevin considered this, his small face serious. "Some people didn't, but you did. And Dr. Thompson, and Aunt Jenny." He picked at the edge of his bandage. "Is Uncle Rick coming to Vermont with us?" The question Sarah had been dreading. "Not right away, Kevin. He needs to stay at the special hospital until the doctors are sure all the bugs are gone from his head." "How long will that take?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But your uncle wants you to be safe and happy with Aunt Jenny until he can get better." Kevin's lower lip trembled, but he fought back tears with visible effort. "Uncle Rick says crying makes the bugs come faster. They like salt." "Oh, Kevin." Sarah gathered him carefully into her arms. "It's okay to cry when you're sad. It doesn't bring any bugs. I promise." Against her shoulder, Kevin finally released the tears he'd been holding back for so long, great heaving sobs that shook his thin frame. Sarah held him through the storm, murmuring reassurances, her own eyes wet. From the doorway, Jennifer watched silently, a small leather journal clutched in her hands, her expression a mixture of heartbreak and resolution. 3 months passed, bringing spring to Maine and Vermont alike. The snow melted, revealing pale green shoots pushing through the softened earth, a visible reminder that even after the harshest winter, life continued its persistent cycle of renewal. In Burlington, Vermont, Jennifer Peterson's modest craftsman-style home had undergone a transformation. The spare bedroom, once used for storage, was now Kevin's room, its walls adorned with his drawings and a large map of constellations. A wooden desk stood beneath the window, scattered with colored pencils and sketchbooks. Captain Cuddles occupied a place of honor on the bed, his single eye watching over a growing collection of books. Kevin himself had changed too. His hair had grown back fully, covering the last traces of the scars on his scalp. Regular meals had filled out his once gaunt frame, and his eyes, though still holding shadows of his ordeal, sparkled more often with the unguarded excitement of childhood. The nightmares that had plagued him during his first weeks in Vermont were becoming less frequent, less intense. On this particular Saturday morning, Kevin sat at the kitchen table, concentrating on a letter he was writing. His tongue poked out slightly from the corner of his mouth as he carefully formed each letter, determined to make his handwriting as neat as possible. "Who are you writing to, Firefly?" Jennifer asked, setting a glass of orange juice beside him. "Miss Sarah," Kevin replied without looking up. "I want to tell her about my new school and my art teacher, Mr. Daniels, who says I might get to be in a real art show this summer." Jennifer smiled, ruffling his hair gently. "I'm sure she'd love to hear about that." "Don't forget to tell her about our visit with Uncle Rick last weekend." Kevin nodded solemnly. "I already did. I told her Uncle Rick looked way better, and how he didn't talk about bugs at all, just asked about my drawings in school." He paused, his pencil hovering over the paper. "Do you think Uncle Rick will be able to come home soon?" Jennifer sat down beside him, choosing her words carefully. "Dr. Reeves says your uncle is making excellent progress." The new medications are working well, and his therapy sessions are helping him understand what's real and what isn't. But it's going to take more time. But he will get better, Kevin insisted, a statement rather than a question. He's working very hard to get better, Jennifer affirmed. And that's the most important part. Now finish your letter so we can get it in today's mail. We've got a busy day ahead, grocery shopping, then the library, and don't forget your appointment with Dr. Freeman at 2. Kevin's enthusiasm dimmed slightly at the mention of his therapist, but he returned to his letter without complaint. Dr. Freeman, with her colorful office and gentle questions, was helping him understand his experiences in the cabin, not to forget them, but to place them in context, to separate his uncle's delusions from reality without diminishing Richard's love for him. In Lakefield, spring brought its own changes. Sarah's barbershop had become more than just a place for haircuts. It was now a hub for community outreach. A bulletin board near the entrance displayed information about mental health resources, veteran support groups, and upcoming fundraisers for the local children's hospital. Once a month, Sarah closed the shop early to host a support group for families affected by mental illness, an initiative inspired by her experience with the Petersons. Today, however, was just an ordinary Tuesday. Sarah swept hair clippings from the floor, enjoying the peaceful lull between appointments. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see Chief Bradford entering, still in uniform. "Morning, William. Little early for your trim, isn't it?" He smiled, removing his hat. "Not here for a haircut. Thought you'd want to know. Richard Peterson's case was resolved yesterday." Sarah's hand tightened on the broom. "And?" Judge Grayson accepted the plea agreement. Richard pled guilty to reckless endangerment, a lesser charge than the original felony, given his mental health status and the recommendations from his doctors. He's been sentenced to continued treatment at Lakefield Psychiatric, followed by 3 years of supervised probation once he's deemed stable for release. Relief washed over Sarah. "No prison time?" "No prison," Chief Bradford confirmed. But strict conditions, regular psychiatric evaluations, mandatory medication compliance, supervised visitation with Kevin only. He'll likely be at Lakefield Psychiatric for at least another 6 months, maybe longer. "Have you told Jennifer?" Chief Bradford nodded. "Called her this morning. She's relieved, said it's the best outcome they could have hoped for. Richard's making real progress, apparently. Last time she took Kevin to visit, Richard was clear-eyed enough to help Kevin with a science project." Sarah leaned the broom against the wall, processing this news. For months, the uncertainty of Richard's legal fate had hung over everything. Kevin's recovery, Jennifer's plans for the future, even Sarah's own conscience. The resolution, while not perfect, offered a path forward for all of them. "Thanks for letting me know, William." He studied her face. "You did the right thing, Sarah. Never doubt that. If you hadn't noticed Kevin's condition when you did, if you hadn't called us—" He let the sentence hang unfinished, the alternative too grim to voice. After Chief Bradford left, Sarah found herself drawn to the small corkboard behind her register, where she kept personal mementos. Among them was a drawing Kevin had sent a month after moving to Vermont. A colorful scene showing Sarah's barbershop with a smiling Sarah standing in the doorway and an equally happy Kevin nearby. Across the top, in his improving handwriting, he'd written, "Thank you for seeing the bugs when no one else did." It was Kevin's way of expressing gratitude, but the phrase held deeper meaning for Sarah. She had seen beyond the physical infection to the larger disease affecting the Peterson family, the untreated trauma, the isolation, the system that had failed them repeatedly. In that moment of recognition, standing in her barbershop with shears in hand, she had changed the course of multiple lives, including her own. The following Saturday, Sarah made the 3-hour drive to Burlington. It had become a monthly ritual, this pilgrimage to check on Kevin, to maintain the connection that had formed so unexpectedly in crisis. Jennifer always welcomed her warmly, treating her less like a visitor and more like extended family. This visit was special. Jennifer had arranged for Sarah to accompany them to Lakefield Psychiatric for Richard's weekend visitation, the first time Sarah would see him since that initial visit 3 months ago. "Are you sure he won't mind?" Sarah asked as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "I'm not exactly a welcome reminder of what happened." "On the contrary," Jennifer replied, turning off the engine. "He's asked about you several times." "I think he wants to thank you." Kevin was already unbuckling his seatbelt, eager to see his uncle. "Uncle Rick's going to be so excited. I brought my new drawings to show him. And guess what? I got an A on my science test." The visiting room at Lakefield Psychiatric was brighter than Sarah remembered, with large windows overlooking a garden where patients walked or sat on benches, enjoying the spring sunshine. Richard waited at a table in the corner, rising when he saw them enter. The change in him was remarkable. He'd gained weight, his face fuller, less haunted. His eyes, once darting and suspicious, were clear and focused. He embraced Kevin first, lifting the boy easily and spinning him around, then greeted Jennifer with a warm hug. When he turned to Sarah, his expression was solemn but not unwelcoming. "Miss Miller, thank you for coming." "Please call me Sarah." Richard nodded, gesturing for everyone to sit. As Kevin eagerly spread his drawings across the table, chattering about school and friends and his new bedroom, Richard listened with rapt attention, asking questions, offering praise. It was the ordinary interaction of a father and son, remarkable only in its normalcy after all they'd been through. During a lull, when Kevin was distracted by a therapy dog visiting another patient, Richard turned to Sarah. "I don't know if I ever properly thanked you," he said quietly, "or apologized for how I behaved that day in your shop." "No thanks or apologies needed," Sarah assured him. "You were protecting Kevin the best way you knew how." "By nearly killing him," Richard said, a flash of the old pain crossing his features. "By loving him enough to seek help even when your mind told you not to trust anyone," Sarah countered. Sarah glanced at Kevin, now returning to their table with a bright smile. "That love is what saved him in the end." Richard's eyes grew damp. "Doctor, Reeves says I need to forgive myself, that holding on to guilt will only feed the delusions. It's the hardest part of recovery." "One day at a time," Jennifer said softly, placing her hand over her brother's. "That's all any of us can do." As they prepared to leave, Kevin threw his arms around his uncle's waist. "Don't forget, Uncle Rick, my art show is next month. Dr. Reeves said maybe you can come if you keep doing good with your medicine." Richard knelt to his nephew's level. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, buddy. I'm fighting hard to be there." "No more bugs?" Kevin whispered. Richard touched his forehead to Kevin's. "The bugs are getting quieter every day. And when they try to trick me, I remember what's real. You, Aunt Jenny. This life we're building." In the car driving back to Burlington, Kevin fell asleep in the back seat, emotionally exhausted from the visit. Jennifer glanced at Sarah, who was staring thoughtfully out the window. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jennifer asked. Sarah smiled. "I was just thinking how strange life is. 6 months ago, none of us knew each other. Now I can't imagine my life without you both in it." "Funny how disaster can lead to blessings," Jennifer agreed. "If you hadn't been the one to cut Kevin's hair that day." The alternative hung unspoken between them, the tragedy narrowly averted, the lives that might have been lost or irreparably damaged. "I'm glad it was me," Sarah said simply. In the back seat, Kevin stirred slightly in his sleep, clutching Captain Cuddles to his chest. His face was peaceful, untroubled by bugs real or imagined, a child finding his way back to innocence after a journey no child should have to make. But beyond the immediate triumph of Kevin's recovery and Richard's improving condition lurked a deeper tragedy, one that Sarah had begun to recognize more clearly over the past months. The broken system that had failed the Peterson family wasn't unique to them. In her support group at the barber shop, Sarah had met Harriet Jackson, an 83-year-old widow caring for her 55-year-old son with schizophrenia. When Harriet fell and broke her hip, her Medicare coverage provided only 3 weeks of rehabilitation, not nearly enough time for her to recover. Her son, unable to care for himself and suddenly without his caretaker, had a psychotic episode and was institutionalized. Now, despite her recovery, their family remained separated by bureaucratic red tape and insufficient resources. Then there was Frank Wilson, a 72-year-old Vietnam veteran whose PTSD had gone untreated for decades. When his wife of 50 years died, his symptoms worsened dramatically. His Medicare prescription coverage ran out mid-year, something called the donut hole, he explained bitterly, forcing him to choose between his psychiatric medications and his heart medication. He chose the latter, and the resulting mental health crisis cost him his home. Each story revealed the same pattern, the elderly and mentally ill falling through gaping holes in America's healthcare safety net. Like Richard, they weren't seeking handouts, just the basic care needed to maintain their dignity and independence. The system's failure was not just a personal tragedy, but a societal one, multiplied across countless families struggling in silence. Kevin's case had drawn attention because it involved a child in danger. But what about all the invisible victims? The elderly caring for mentally ill adult children with no respite, the aging veterans battling demons alone, the senior citizens forced to choose between medication and food. As Sarah glanced again at Kevin's peaceful face in the rearview mirror, she made a quiet promise to herself. This story wouldn't end with just one family healed. There were too many others still suffering, too many Richard Petersons with no one to see the real infection beneath the surface symptoms, too many complex truths hidden behind simple judgments. The battle for Kevin's health had been won. The war for a more compassionate system was just beginning. 6 months after Kevin's hospitalization, Sarah found herself in an unfamiliar position, testifying before the Maine State Legislature's Health and Human Services Committee. She smoothed her skirt nervously as she waited to be called, surrounded by healthcare professionals, policy experts, and fellow advocates. The room was packed. News of the Barber and the boy, as the local papers had dubbed Kevin's case, had spread beyond Lakefield, capturing public attention throughout the state. What began as a shocking story of neglect had evolved into a rallying cry for mental health reform, particularly for veterans and the elderly. Ms. Sarah Miller, announced the committee chair, a silver-haired woman with reading glasses perched on her nose. Sarah approached the microphone, clearing her throat. The prepared statement in her hands suddenly seemed inadequate. Instead, she folded it and looked directly at the committee members. I'm not a policy expert or a healthcare professional, at least not anymore. I'm just a barber who noticed something wrong with a child's scalp. But what I've learned in the months since could fill volumes. She recounted Kevin's story, careful to protect the family's privacy while highlighting the systemic failures that had allowed the situation to develop. Richard Peterson wasn't a monster. He was a decorated veteran who fell through the cracks of our mental health care system. When his Medicare Part D coverage hit the donut hole, he could no longer afford his psychiatric medications. When the VA hospital nearest to him closed due to budget cuts, his monthly check-ins became quarterly at a facility 2 hours away. When his PTSD worsened, there was no safety net to catch him or the child in his care. A committee member interrupted. So, Miller, while this is a compelling anecdote, what evidence do you have that this represents a systemic problem rather than an isolated incident? Sarah had anticipated this question. In the 6 months since I started the Family Mental Health Support Group in Lakefield, we've identified 37 similar cases in our county alone. Elderly people caring for mentally ill family members without adequate support, veterans unable to access consistent psychiatric care, seniors forced to choose between mental health medication and other necessities due to insurance gaps. She gestured to the folder she'd provided each committee member. You'll find their stories documented there, along with data from the Maine Veterans Affairs Office, showing that 62% of rural veterans report difficulty accessing mental health services. The problem isn't isolated, it's epidemic. As she continued her testimony, Sarah could see skepticism giving way to concern on several faces. She described Frank Wilson, the Vietnam veteran who lost his home after falling into the Medicare prescription coverage gap, and Harriet Jackson, the elderly woman separated from her schizophrenic son because rehabilitation services were cut short. What makes these cases particularly tragic is that they're preventable. The cost of proactive care is a fraction of what we spend addressing the crises that result from neglect. In Richard Peterson's case, consistent medication and therapy would have cost approximately $6,000 per year. His psychiatric hospitalization and Kevin's emergency treatment have already cost the state over $150,000. When she finished speaking, the room was silent for a moment before the questions began. The committee members probed for details, challenged her assertions, and occasionally nodded in agreement. Sarah answered with the confidence of someone who had lived with these realities, not just studied them. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," the chairwoman said finally. "Your testimony has been most illuminating." As Sarah gathered her notes, a legislative aide approached her. "Dr. Thompson asked me to give you this," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "She couldn't be here in person." Sarah opened it once she was in the hallway. Inside was a medical report with a sticky note from Dr. Thompson. "Thought you might find this interesting. Could be relevant to your testimony." The report detailed findings from a study conducted on Richard's and Kevin's blood samples. Both showed markers for neurological inflammation consistent with Bartonella infection. In Richard's case, the infection appeared chronic, possibly dating back years. A handwritten note at the bottom read, "Consider that some of Richard's psychosis may have had a physiological basis all along. The distinction between mental and physical illness continues to blur." Sarah sat heavily on a bench, absorbing the implications. If Richard's delusions about bugs were partly caused by an actual infection affecting his brain, one that then spread to Kevin, the entire narrative shifted. It wasn't just a story about mental health care failures, but about the artificial separation between physical and mental health in America's healthcare system. She was still contemplating this when her phone rang. It was Jennifer. "How did it go?" Jennifer asked. "Better than expected." The committee seemed genuinely interested. A few members approached me afterward about drafting new legislation. "That's wonderful. Kevin's been watching the live stream. He's very proud of his Barber hero, as he calls you." Sarah smiled. "How is our budding artist?" "Thriving. His art teacher entered one of his drawings in a statewide competition, and he's been invited to the governor's mansion next month for the awards ceremony." "That's fantastic. There's more," Jennifer continued, her voice brightening. "Richard's doctors have recommended him for the transitional housing program. If all goes well, he could be living in a supervised apartment by Christmas." "Jennifer, that's incredible news." "There's a catch, of course. The program requires family participation in weekly therapy sessions, and I can't always take that much time off work. We're trying to figure out a solution." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I could help. I already drive up monthly, and I could adjust my schedule for weekly visits during the transition period." "You've already done so much." "I want to," Sarah interrupted. "You and Kevin and Richard, you're family now." The silence on the other end told Sarah that Jennifer was fighting tears. "Thank you," she said finally. "We feel the same way." After hanging up, Sarah checked her watch. She had just enough time to make her next appointment, a meeting with Senator Michael Collins, who had expressed interest in sponsoring legislation to address the Medicare prescription coverage gap. As she gathered her things, a custodian approached her bench. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you Sarah Miller, the Barber lady?" Surprised, Sarah nodded. "My mother saw you on the news. She wanted me to thank you. My father's a Vietnam vet with PTSD. Been struggling for years with the VA. What you're doing, it matters to families like mine." This happened increasingly often now, strangers approaching to share their stories, to thank her for speaking out. Each encounter reinforced what Sarah had come to understand. For every Richard and Kevin whose story made headlines, thousands of others suffered in silence. Sarah's testimony and advocacy work had unexpected consequences. A pharmaceutical company executive, moved by Kevin's story, established a patient assistance program specifically for elderly caregivers and veterans who fell into the Medicare coverage gap. A national mental health organization opened a satellite office in Lakefield, providing free counseling services to veterans and their families. Sarah's barbershop became an unofficial community resource center with information about mental health services prominently displayed. But the most significant development came 6 weeks after her testimony, when Senator Collins introduced the Peterson-Miller Healthcare Continuity Act. The proposed legislation would eliminate the Medicare Part D coverage gap for seniors and disabled veterans, increase funding for rural mental health services, and establish a special support program for elderly caregivers of mentally ill family members. "Will it pass?" Jennifer asked when Sarah called to share the news. "Honestly, it's a long shot." But it started a conversation that wasn't happening before. And every conversation brings us closer to real change. On a crisp October morning, Sarah made the now familiar drive to Lakefield Psychiatric Hospital. Richard had requested a special meeting with her, separate from his regular family visits. She found him waiting in the garden, looking more like himself than she had seen since that first day in her barbershop. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, his own clothes, not hospital-issued, and had gained enough weight that his face no longer appeared gaunt. "Thank you for coming," he said, rising to greet her. "I wanted to talk to you privately." They walked along a gravel path bordered by late-blooming asters. Richard moved with new confidence, his gaze steady, his hands no longer trembling. "The doctors found Bartonella in my blood work," he began, without preamble. "They think I've had it for years, maybe since Afghanistan." It doesn't explain everything. The PTSD is real, the depression after Michael died was real, but it might explain some of the more unusual thoughts I was having. "Dr. Thompson shared the findings with me," Sarah replied. "It must be validating to know there was a physical component." Richard nodded. "All this time I thought I was crazy for feeling things crawling under my skin, for being convinced there were bugs in my head. Turns out, in a way, there were." They reached a bench overlooking a small pond and sat down. A family of ducks paddled across the water, the ducklings nearly grown now but still following their mother in perfect formation. "I've been following your work with the legislature," Richard continued. "Jennifer brings me the newspaper clippings. What you're doing, it's important. I just want to make sure what happened to you and Kevin doesn't happen to other families. That's why I asked you here today." Richard reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. "I've been writing down my experiences with the VA, with Medicare, with trying to get help and hitting walls at every turn. Dr. Reeves thinks it might be therapeutic, but I thought maybe it could be useful for your advocacy work." He handed her the paper. "This is just a sample. I have about 100 pages so far. Jennifer's typed most of it up. If you think it would help other families or convince legislators, you're welcome to use it." Sarah unfolded the paper. Richard's handwriting was neat and precise, the words carefully chosen. She read the first paragraph. I don't remember exactly when the bug started. Maybe it was after the IED that killed Johnson and Martinez. Maybe it was after Michael took his life. Maybe it was when the VA clinic closed and my prescription ran out. What I do remember is the fear, not for myself but for Kevin. I was all he had left. Who would protect him if the bugs got me too? Sarah looked up, her eyes moist. Richard, this is powerful. People need to hear this perspective. There's something else. He hesitated. Dr. Reeves thinks I'm ready for the transitional housing program. I'll still need supervision, still need therapy, but I'd have more independence, more chances to see Kevin. That's wonderful news. The thing is, Richard continued, his voice dropping, the program requires participants to have a job or volunteer position. Most places won't hire someone with my history. Sarah understood immediately. You need employment. Even part-time would qualify me. I can't ask Jennifer. She's already doing so much. But I thought maybe... You want to work at the barber shop? Richard looked surprised. How did you know? Just a hunch. Sarah smiled. What skills do you have? Before the Army, I worked maintenance jobs. I'm good with my hands. Carpentry, basic plumbing, electrical. I noticed your shop could use some renovations. The back room has potential for expansion. Sarah had been considering expanding the community resource area of her shop for months, but hadn't found the time or the right contractor. When would you be eligible to start? If I'm approved for the program, I could begin supervised work release in about 4 weeks. Just a few hours a week at first. Richard, I think this could work for both of us. Let me talk to your doctors and the program administrators. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. I know it's a lot to ask after everything. It's not, Sarah interrupted. This is what community means. We help each other heal. As they walked back toward the hospital building, Richard paused. There's one more thing I've been meaning to ask. That first day in your shop, why did you fight so hard for Kevin? You barely knew us. Sarah thought about the question. She could have given the simple answer, professional responsibility, human decency. But Richard deserved the truth. Years ago, my ex-husband won custody of my son Michael. He refused to get proper medical care for a respiratory infection, and Michael nearly died from pneumonia. By the time I got him to a hospital, he was in critical condition. She looked away, the memory still painful. I couldn't save my own son from neglect. When I saw Kevin in my chair that day, I think part of me was trying to save them both. Understanding dawned in Richard's eyes. That's why you named the legislation after Peterson Miller. Not just our family, but yours too. Sarah nodded. Every child deserves protection. Every family deserves support. As she drove home that evening, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 9 months. From a simple haircut to state legislative testimony, from stranger to family, from bystander to advocate. The road ahead would be long and difficult. Changing entrenched systems always was. But for the first time in years, she felt purposeful, connected to something larger than herself. Her phone chimed with a text message from Jennifer. Kevin just heard Richard might work at your shop. He's already designing a new sign for the barber shop that includes all 3 of us. This child's optimism is relentless. Sarah smiled. Sometimes the most powerful force for change wasn't rage against injustice or sophisticated policy arguments, but simply the unshakable belief of a child that the world could be better, that broken families could be mended, that sick people could heal, that love could overcome even the most entrenched systems of neglect. Maybe, just maybe, Kevin was right. 1 year after Sarah first discovered the infection on Kevin's scalp, Lakefield was transformed by an unseasonably warm autumn. The maple trees lining Main Street blazed with color, their reflections shimmering in the shop windows. Sarah stood outside her barber shop, admiring the new sign that hung above the door, Miller Peterson Family Barber Shop and Community Center. The renovation had been Richard's first major project during his work release program, and his craftsmanship was evident in every detail. What had once been a simple barber shop now included a comfortable community room in the back, with resource materials, a small lending library, and space for support group meetings. The shop itself had been modernized while preserving its vintage charm. The antique barber pole still spun, but new fixtures and lighting made the space more welcoming. Sarah checked her watch. They would be arriving soon. Today marked several milestones. Kevin's first visit back to Lakefield since his hospitalization, Richard's transition to the supervised apartment program, and the official grand reopening of the barbershop. The local newspaper was sending a photographer, and several state legislators had confirmed their attendance, including Senator Collins, whose Peterson-Miller Healthcare Continuity Act had passed the state Senate and was now awaiting a vote in the House. Dorothy Wilson was the first to arrive, her silver hair freshly styled for the occasion, a large covered dish in her hands. "My famous apple crisp," she announced, making her way to the refreshment table in the community room. No celebration is complete without it. The bell above the door chimed continuously as more townspeople arrived. Chief Bradford and his wife, Dr. Thompson from the hospital, the regulars from Sarah's support group, and curious neighbors drawn by the commotion. By noon, the shop was filled with conversation and laughter. When the Peterson family car pulled up outside, a hush fell over the crowd. Sarah stepped out to greet them, her heart full at the sight. Jennifer emerged first, looking relaxed and happy in a way Sarah hadn't seen before. Kevin bounded out next, now a healthy 9-year-old with bright eyes and rosy cheeks, his backpack bulging with artwork he was eager to show everyone. Richard was the last to exit the car, moving more slowly but with purpose. He wore pressed khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt, his face clean-shaven, his eyes clear. A silver pin on his collar identified him as a participant in the Veteran Transitional Program, but otherwise there was little to distinguish him from any other proud uncle watching his nephew race excitedly toward the barbershop. "Welcome back to Lakefield," Sarah said, embracing each of them in turn. Kevin tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Sarah, did you see the sign?" "Uncle Rick made it. He let me design the letters." "It's beautiful, Kevin. The best sign on Main Street without a doubt." Richard hung back slightly, surveying the gathering inside the shop with a mix of pride and apprehension. This was his first large social event since beginning his recovery, a test of how far he'd come. "You've done amazing work here," Sarah told him quietly. "Are you ready for this?" He took a deep breath. "One day at a time, right? Today is a good day." Inside, the reception was warmer than Richard could have imagined. Instead of the judgment or suspicion he had feared, he found genuine welcome. Chief Bradford shook his hand firmly. Dr. Thompson updated him on the Bartonella research study his case had inspired. Even the townspeople who had once whispered about him now approached with respectful curiosity, eager to see the renovations he had completed. Kevin became the unofficial tour guide, proudly showing visitors the community room and explaining the resources available. "This shelf has books about brains and how they work," he informed an elderly couple. "And this one has information about medicines and stuff. Uncle Rick says knowledge is power." Jennifer found Sarah by the refreshment table. "I hardly recognize him," she said, watching Kevin charming the crowd. "Not just physically, though thank God those awful infections are gone, but emotionally. He's a different child." "Children are remarkably resilient," Sarah replied. "Once they feel safe, they can heal from almost anything." "It's not just Kevin who's transformed," Jennifer said, nodding toward Richard, who was deep in conversation with Senator Collins. 6 months ago, the idea of Richard in a crowded room would have been unthinkable. Now look at him. Richard was describing the renovations to the senator, his hands moving animatedly as he pointed out specific features. "We used sustainable materials wherever possible," they overheard him explaining. "The flooring is reclaimed pine from a local barn, and the lighting is all LED, which reduced the electricity usage by almost 60%. "Impressive," Senator Collins responded. "And you did this work yourself?" "With supervision," Richard acknowledged. "The program requires a licensed contractor to oversee all my projects, but yes, I did the physical work. It's been therapeutic." The senator nodded thoughtfully. "You know, the Veterans Affairs Committee is looking for success stories like yours to highlight when we push for expanded mental health services. Would you be willing to share your experience?" Richard hesitated only briefly. "If it helps other vets get the care they need before things go as wrong as they did for me, absolutely." Kevin suddenly appeared at his uncle's side, tugging insistently on his sleeve. "Uncle Rick, Miss Dorothy wants to take our picture in front of the new Barber chair. Come on." As Richard allowed himself to be led away, Jennifer turned back to Sarah. "Have you told him yet?" Sarah shook her head. "I wanted to wait until today, when he could see all this. The community supporting him, Kevin thriving, the shop transformed. I wanted him to be in a good place to hear the news." "He is," Jennifer assured her. "This is the right time." The official ceremony began at 1 p.m. Sarah stood behind the antique barber chair, now restored to gleaming perfection, and addressed the crowd. "A year ago in this very shop, I made a decision that changed many lives, including my own. What began as a routine haircut became a journey of healing, not just for one family, but for our entire community." She acknowledged the various contributions: Jennifer's unwavering support of both Kevin and Richard, Chief Bradford's compassionate handling of a difficult case, Dr. Thompson's thorough medical care, and the community members who had rallied around the Peterson family in various ways. "But the real heroes of this story are Richard and Kevin Peterson," Sarah continued, gesturing for them to join her. "Their resilience, their courage, and their unbreakable bond remind us that even in our darkest moments, connection and love can light the way forward." Kevin beamed as he stood beside his uncle, while Richard looked down, uncomfortable with the praise, but standing tall nonetheless. Senator Collins spoke next, updating the crowd on the progress of the health care legislation and crediting Sarah and the Petersons with bringing much-needed attention to gaps in mental health and elder care services. "The Peterson-Miller Health Care Continuity Act has already gained bipartisan support," the senator announced. "We expect a vote in the House within the month, and the governor has indicated he will sign it into law. This will eliminate the prescription coverage gap for seniors and disabled veterans, expand rural mental health services, and create new support programs for family caregivers." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Richard stood motionless, overwhelmed by the realization that his painful journey had catalyzed meaningful change for others. After the formal presentations, as guests mingled and enjoyed refreshments, Sarah drew Richard aside to the quiet corner of the shop where her office was located. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you," she began, closing the door partway for privacy. "The barbershop is doing well, better than ever actually, with the community center bringing in new people. I'm thinking about expanding our services." Richard nodded. "I noticed you have space for another barber station. Smart business move." "It's not just about business," Sarah said carefully. "The Veteran Transitional Program Coordinator mentioned you're eligible for vocational training as part of your recovery plan." Understanding dawned slowly on Richard's face. "You want me to train as a barber?" "I want to offer you an apprenticeship," Sarah confirmed. "You've already proven you're good with your hands, attentive to detail, and capable of connecting with people. The program would cover your training costs, and you could work here part-time while you learn." Richard was silent for a long moment, processing the unexpected offer. "Why?" he finally asked. After everything that happened, why would you trust me with your business, your reputation?" Sarah leaned against her desk. "Do you remember what Kevin said in his letter? Thank you for seeing the bugs when no one else did." "Well, you see things too, Richard. You notice details others miss. You recognized something was wrong with Kevin long before anyone else. You just didn't have the tools to address it properly," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Your hypervigilance, the very thing that made life so difficult during the worst of your PTSD, could become your greatest strength in a different context. As a barber, noticing small changes in clients can be life-saving. I've lost count of how many skin cancers, infections, and other health issues I've spotted over the years." Richard looked down at his hands, turning them over as if seeing them anew. "You really think I could do this?" "I know you could. More importantly, I think it would be healing. For you, for Kevin, and for this community. Every person who sits in your chair would see that recovery is possible, that second chances are real." The door creaked open slightly, revealing Kevin's anxious face. "Is everything okay? You guys look serious." "Everything's fine, Firefly," Jennifer assured him, appearing behind him. "Miss Sarah is just offering your uncle a job." Kevin's eyes widened. "You're going to be a barber, Uncle Rick? Like Miss Sarah?" Richard looked from Sarah to Jennifer to Kevin, seeing in each face the same unconditional support that had sustained him through the darkest periods of his recovery. "I think I might be," he said softly, "if that's okay with you." "That's more than okay," Kevin exclaimed, launching himself at his uncle. "That's the best thing ever. You can cut my hair, and I can help sweep up, and we can work together and—" "Whoa, slow down," Richard laughed, steadying himself against Kevin's enthusiasm. "I have a lot to learn first. It'll take time." "We have time," Sarah said simply. "All the time you need." As they rejoined the celebration, Sarah found herself momentarily alone, watching the Petersons interact with the townspeople who had once judged them so harshly. She thought about the long journey from that first terrifying day in her shop to this moment of triumph and possibility. The Medicare legislation wasn't a perfect solution. Richard's recovery would always be a work in progress. Kevin would carry the emotional scars of his traumatic experiences. The healthcare system still had gaping holes that left the elderly and mentally ill vulnerable. But today, in this small corner of Maine, something important had shifted. A community had learned to look beneath the surface, to see the complex truth behind simple judgments. A family, fractured by trauma, was finding its way back to wholeness. A system that had failed was being challenged and reformed. Dorothy Wilson appeared at Sarah's side, following her gaze to where Richard was showing Kevin how to properly sweep hair clippings. "You did good, Sarah Miller," the older woman said approvingly. "Real good." Sarah shook her head. "We all did. That's the point, isn't it? None of us can solve these problems alone. Not mental illness, not health care gaps, not family trauma. We need each other." "Always been that way," Dorothy nodded sagely. "Folks just forget sometimes." "Need reminding that we're all connected, that what happens to the least of us happens to all of us eventually." As the afternoon light slanted through the barbershop windows, painting golden rectangles across the newly finished floor, Sarah watched Kevin demonstrate his sweeping technique to a group of admiring children. Richard stood nearby, his posture relaxed, his eyes clear and present. Jennifer chatted with Senator Collins about educational programs for children who had experienced trauma. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The real work of healing, both personal and systemic, stretched out before them. There would be setbacks and struggles, policy fights, and personal demons to conquer. But today, in this moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel something that had been missing for too long. Hope. For Kevin, who would grow up knowing he was loved and protected, for Richard, who was finding purpose in his pain, for a community that had learned to see beyond its prejudices, for a healthcare system that might finally begin to address its fundamental failings, and for herself. No longer just a barber, no longer just a former nurse, but a bridge between worlds, a witness to suffering and healing alike, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply pay attention to what others have missed. As if sensing her thoughts, Kevin looked up from his sweeping demonstration and caught her eye across the room. His smile, open, trusting, and full of possibility, was all the confirmation Sarah needed. They had seen the bugs when no one else did, and that had made all the difference. Folks, this story touches on something many of us know all too well: how our systems fail those who fought for our country and the families struggling to care for them. Sarah Miller reminds us of a time when neighbors truly looked out for each other when we noticed a child in need or a veteran struggling. These days, it's too easy to mind our own business, to look away from uncomfortable truths. But one person's courage can save a life, give a broken family a second chance, and bring a community together. Many of us have watched our own children or grandchildren struggle with problems we don't fully understand. Many have loved ones battling demons from their service years. This story asks us, what small act of attention or kindness might we offer today that could change someone's world tomorrow? Remember when we were young, how communities rallied around families in crisis? That spirit isn't gone. It's just waiting for us to revive it. Has someone in your life ever noticed something wrong when everyone else missed it? How did that change your path? Share your story below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.